Welcome back. So, now I'm going to talk about how to deal with the outliers. So, the first thing we do is data quality check. This is the most common use. The question that we ask ourselves is that is this data point, is this outlier even valid? So, these are the things we check for when we find outliers. Measurement errors, maybe it is a measurement error, maybe there's a fault in the sensors. That's why it gave you that weird value. Maybe it's a data entry mistakes, or maybe there's a units mismatch. For example, in the case of a medical contest, let's look at the tumor size. Maybe somebody wrote a tumor size as 500 millimeter, but that's not possible. So you know this one is not even a valid. Then maybe you're missing a decimal number. So maybe the values are like all like say 1.2. Let's say the height is 1.2, and somebody forgot to write decimal over there. So they forgot to write decimal. So this becomes 120 right there. So this is an example of your decimal conversion. Also, wrong unit conversion. This is another example. So, for example, let's say you're dealing with meters, and now you have converted meters into centimeter. So maybe somebody had made a mistake. So let's say everything in meter was like 1 meter or 2 meter, numbers like this, and now you convert this into centimeter. This is going to become 100 centimeter, 200 centimeter. So your numbers go from 1 comma 2 to 200, 200. Sorry, 100 to 200. So this is an example of your wrong unit conversion. So outliers, they are your first suspect in your data cleaning. So the action that you take is you correct the value or remove it if proven wrong. So let's say you have data, let's say 1, 2, and then all of a sudden you come across this value 300. Okay, and you know that there is no way the value can be 300, and you know all the units are meters right here. Okay, so this is 1 meter, this is 2 meter, and then somebody wrote 300 meters. So it's very likely that this could be 300. Maybe they made a mistake over here. This they wrote in centimeter. Maybe this should have been a meter. So you may have to actually correct this value. So you may have to correct it 3 meter if you know that this is what happened. Otherwise, remove it completely if you are proven wrong. Other option would be to remove outliers. This is only in specific cases. So what type of scenarios is removal justified? Well, one of them is when you're training a distance based model. For example, your KNN, your K means, your linear regression. These are all your distance based models. So in this case, your outlier, they can be a little problematic. Outliers, they can distort your mean value, they can distort your variance, your distance calculation, and because they can do all these things, that's why in these scenarios it is removal is justified in this case. So, for example, let's say you're predicting average tumor size. In that case, remove your outlier because that outlier is going to distort this thing. Another one would be, let's say you're designing some type of machine learning model that is going to be fraud free. So this since this model is going to be fraud free transaction model, so you want to remove your outlier in this case. A word of warning that never delete outlier just because your model is performing better. So you should check your model performance with versus without outliers. So the outliers, you should keep them because sometimes they are the most important part of your data. For example, in real life, an outlier could actually indicate a fraud transaction. In medical community or medical domain, this could represent a medical abnormalities. For in the case of cybersecurity, in the case of network, it could represent a network intrusion. Maybe somebody's trying to hack into your system. In the case of manufacturing, maybe it could represent some type of defect. Everything is normal, but then you have some outlier points. Maybe those represents your manufacturing defects, defective pieces. For example, in the breast cancer data set right here, your outlier, it could be a rare tumor pattern, or it could be aggressive malignancies, or it could be borderline cases. So in these cases, you do not want to remove them. You want to keep your outliers. So, a word of note, in medical domain, your outliers, they are often the cases where your doctors, they care more about the most. So these outliers, they are flagged for human review. So if somebody comes across a data point, there is an outlier, they actually ask somebody to, hey, maybe you want to go and look at the data point, what's going on. Maybe you want to prioritize that particular diagnosis. Maybe you want to look into that patient a little bit more closely, and you want to give it that particular patient a higher priority. Or maybe this could be early warning system for something to come. So do not delete outliers blindly. Understand what's happening, understand your domain. One thing you can do is you can convert your outliers into a feature. So instead of deleting them, what you can do, you can create a new feature. So maybe let's say you detect an outlier using KNN. So you can create a feature called is underscore outlier KNN. This would be a Boolean feature, yes and no. You can create another feature called is outlier LOF if you're using LOF technique, LOF technique. If you're using some type of outlier score, you can even create a score for that. Now, why is this so important? Well, the reason this is so important, so powerful, is because the models they learn the risk. Also, you can create separate model with or without outliers. So, without outlier, that would be your normal model, and the one with the outlier, that would be your specialized model. Also, by keeping your outliers, you are not losing information; you are keeping your information. So, for example, in the credit risk modeling or medical risk prediction or fraud detection, you do not want to delete your outliers. In this case, you want to keep them because in this particular instance, your outlier risk they become a risk score. So let's look at some of the domain specific examples of outliers. For example, in the case of medical, this could represent in rare cancer cases. So if you see unusual tumor growth patterns, so maybe you want to send the data to a senior doctor for review. In the case of finance, an outlier, this could be an unusual transaction. In that case, you may want to have a manual audit or maybe investigate or freeze the account temporarily. In the case of manufacturing, then outlier, it could be a defective part. So in this case, maybe you want to calibrate your machine. Maybe the machine needs calibration. And then you can perform root cause analysis over here.